Hi, guys. Thank you for coming out in the rain. Really, really the pro-democracy crowd. We feel like we should have the lights on all of you. Thank you. So Carol Leonnig is one of the most important journalists in this moment, and one of the most important storytellers, not just for her ability to unearth what happened, but to help us understand what that means right now in this moment. This book, which she has co-written with Aaron, is the best of the best. It's the best information people who have covered these events every day for the last 9 years have ever had access to. It answers questions I've been asking on television and off for almost 10 years. So if you are reading and you think, God, I didn't know that, neither did we, the people that do this every day for a living. So with that as a sort of an indication of how precious this information is, why don't we start with a little bit of your sort of tradecraft? How did you go about writing this and reporting this?
Well, we started together a long time ago. We both covered January 6th and that day and the immediate aftermath, trying to understand all the security failures. And that carried us through a long time after January 6th. We worked for almost a year trying to do a before, during, after kind of series about all of that. And then Carol comes to me with a tip about a year and a half later.
I feel like that's a Netflix series. Carol comes to me with a tip.
And she's like, I've got something, I think. But if it's really true, it's crazy. And I remember we were sitting in the Don Graham conference room in the middle of the Washington Post, and we're sitting in there. It's a big glass bubble, so everybody's walking by the Washington Post wondering what they're talking about. And she starts to tell me this tip about how someone inside is telling me that they're actually not investigating Donald Trump or anyone around him. And, it was explosive because we look back at the day after January 6th, and the acting U.S. attorney is out there saying, we're going to go as far as we need to go and investigate this. And it turns out there was a much very different story to tell from inside the building.
What happened next?
I have to say something just because I'm a mom, which is there's some empty seats in the front that we accidentally stored and reserved and just pushed this pink
come on
coat
up. Yeah, we can't see you, so if you shuffle around.
If you want to come closer,
come closer,
we would love it if you did.
Yeah.
We reserved some spots. Yes, that's who I reserved it for.
There you go.
Just push that.
1, 2, 3, 4 more.
Delightful. All right.
2 together over here. Okay. There you go. All right. Okay. There we go.
Okay, mom job done. Okay. So the next thing that happened is, of course, because I teamed up with a great reporter, I brought him into that little glass bubble because I knew Aaron Davis, if there was anybody that was going to soldier forward and be able to help me nail this, it was him. And indeed, that's exactly what happened. We wrote a story that showed that the investigation had not really begun at all at the Department of Justice until some embarrassing things leaked out from the House Select Committee. You guys remember the House Select Committee was investigating January 6th, and in January, news was leaking out that they had great evidence about the fake electors, and they'd subpoenaed all this information. It's really weird for a congressional committee to be the first footprints in the snow on a big deal crime. And they were, and they knew they were, and DOJ was nowhere to be found. So anyway, we nailed that story, but as the two of us started to study in our minds, why is it that it took 12 months for DOJ to even begin considering looking at an attempt to overturn a free and fair election, which is a federal and a state crime? We wanted to understand, what has happened at the Department of Justice that it is not pursuing evidence of a crime, following its mantra without fear or favor? And lo and behold, Penguin Press was really interested in the answer to that question too, and they offered us, a good deal to try to dig a little deeper. And I've done a couple books before. This is my first one with Aaron, and I got to tell you, this was the hardest one. Not because I was teamed with Aaron, but because. Quite the opposite. It was the hardest book I've ever done, and I think it's unfair to Aaron that I asked him to join me in this one because it's such an opaque institution, and they hold their secrets tight, like the CIA, and some of the things they did were embarrassing to them. Some of the choices they made were embarrassing to them, and there was a lot of clawing and fighting to get the information. I don't know if I really answered your question, Nicolle.
Well, let me just add to it then. I mean, I think that what comes clear in this, and I've said this to you privately, is that I'm a big baseball family. You know, 3 people went up to the plate, and in their own way, they all took a bat to the rule of law. I mean, first, Bill Barr; second, Merrick Garland; and third, I don't even know, it's more like a machete, Pam Bondi. And that's the structure of the book. But the plot twist is really Merrick Garland. Explain.
So, wait, I'm ruining our whole order of things because Aaron's supposed to answer this question, but I'll take a try. So Merrick Garland is a really well-respected judge. I covered him when I was much younger than I am now. And as you know, he didn't make it to the Supreme Court because of Mitch McConnell and that blockade. And the consolation prize essentially was to be AG. But the problem was he went and returned to a playbook that is post-Watergate, when the country was in full agreement, Republican and liberal, progressive, Democrats, whatever, independents, were in agreement that what Nixon had done was a horrific abuse of the Department of Justice, the FBI, and his office. But what Merrick Garland decides, having grown up in that era, is that he is going to avoid looking political. And he actually says this publicly: it's not enough to be apolitical. You have to be perceived, and seem to be apolitical. And he steers away from the open evidence. And now we know, because of the reporting we did in this book, that 3 times, we didn't know about before, prosecutors from different walks of the earth came forward and said, this looks like a crime. Should we look into this? And they were batted back one after the other. First in December 2020, then in February 2021, and again in November of 2021. And it takes a full 15 months before the FBI and the Justice Department jointly begin this investigation. Again, motivated by the leaks that are coming out that the House Select Committee is really piecing this crime together.
And I was saving one for you. I mean, one of the things that's reported out is why he does that. That the damage that Trump succeeded in doing to both the Department of Justice and the FBI with his constant, I mean, the problem with sort of the brain, right, is we adapt, and we have maybe a unhealthy sense that in Trump 1.0, these institutions survive. But what Garland, I'm not trying to make any excuses for him, but what he sees is that Trump has done a lot of damage to the Department of Justice and the FBI. And so explain that part of the reporting and that part of the book.
Sure. So when we did write that first story back in 2023 about some of these delays, we got a lot of blowback from folks who worked for Merrick Garland and for people who were defending him, saying, how could you talk about this? We really had to take a different course. We couldn't be in the place we were at under the first Trump term, where decisions were being made at the highest rungs of the department by the political appointees, and that was impacting how the cases were being manifest through court. And Merrick Garland really recoiled against that. And naturally, we benefited in a way in our reporting for this book by having done it in 2 kind of blocks. We went on book leave in the summer of 2023 from the Post and started going back and trying to re-report what happened in the first Trump term, because people would say, when they're defending of Garland, they'd say, you just don't understand how much it's because of what happened before. And when we did sit down for the first time with our editor for this book and talked about where this whole thing would begin, it occurred to me it was really important to understand what is the condition of the Department of Justice when the sun comes up on January 6th. Before anything happens that day, what kind of a position were they in to manage what was going to come? And so 2 years ago, nobody thought Donald Trump was going to be president again, and were willing to tell us a lot of things about what happened during the first Trump term that they'd never really talked about before. And so we went back and we re-reported the Mueller investigation. We re-reported the Mike Flynn and Roger Stone and those whole cases that everybody thinks they kind of understand and weren't really good. But there was more to tell, and there was a really, almost, there's some cinematic moments inside the room of when these prosecutors are in the position of, everything they've ever stood for, the Constitution, the oath that they took to the Constitution, they realize they're being asked to do something very different than that. And then equally inside the FBI, how intense it was to have the President of the United States call out agents by name and their reputations to be destroyed. And that really had an impact. And you see that start to come to bear as Merrick Garland is in office. It's not just him, it's the rungs below him, and it's the rungs, very senior rungs inside the FBI, especially in the Washington field office, who are equally reticent. There's a moment in the first throes of trying to get the investigation going where the head of the Washington field office in the FBI says, "I'm not going to subpoena the friggin' Willard Hotel. I don't want to know." And that really was kind of
That was a command center for January 6th, where just explain who was there on January 6th.
Well, that is January 6th. Who's there in the Willard Hotel, of course. Willard Hotel is this, fancy hotel adjacent to the White House downtown where Roger Stone is seen outside the night before with Oath Keeper bodyguards, and we later learned that Rudy Giuliani and others are staying there at that time. And it seems to be this nexus, this hub of people close to the president and people close, and actually people who went into the Capitol the next day. And so it seems like a pretty good place for.
Like if January 6th was a bank robbery, it's where the people known to be friends with people who rob banks were looking at maps of banks and say, it's kind of important, right?
Yeah, and also calling all the states to say, send us those fake elector documents, and so all that stuff was kind of happening in that area.
I mean, what the book seems to take all of us into is that every person who comes up short leads to where we are today, which is MAGA-friendly prosecutors. The people leaving now didn't leave on January 20th when Trump was sworn in on a campaign of retribution. So they're not all MAGA, but they stayed. And the people that are leaving when they're being asked to prosecute Tish James and prosecute Jim Comey, they're having their reputations ruined in far more brutal and abrupt and capricious ways than in 1.0. Do any of these people along the way, the Mueller team, the Garland team, do any of them express remorse or regret?
I think there's a lot of shock that's going on right now. I think we did find some regret and remorse about the way that some of the things happened in the Mueller investigation. And I think more of that's in the book than maybe has been said before, that they really didn't expect it to play out that way, and we're all feel like some mistakes were made.
Just to clarify, sorry, I have to add because I'm a mom. They really didn't feel that team now regrets that Barr outfoxed them. Bill Barr outfoxed them and was able to recast their investigation as nothing to see here.
Yeah, the big headlines the morning after are exonerated, right?
So the folks who are leaving now, it's interesting. There were conversations around Election Day, right about this time a year ago, where the then Attorney General, Merrick Garland, and folks close to him are urging people to stay in their positions, stay here, and he talks to people in different offices, don't leave, and hold this place together. And so many of them now have been pushed out in this dramatic fashion. I'll leave it at there for now. Well,
I guess what I was going to add to your thoughts on that question is what are we left with? Like, what is the actual Department of Justice right now?
So the people that are inside are traumatized, scandalized, a mixture of panicky and resigned, because they are seeing their bosses step in front of them and the grenades of, you will indict Letitia James, even though the evidence doesn't justify it, or at least career prosecutors, I should say, have concluded the evidence does not justify it. You will indict Adam Schiff for mortgage fraud, even though the records show he had no intentionality of suggesting that he was going to have one home he was going to live in as his primary residence. They are not monolithic, right? We've talked to a lot of these people right before the book came out and after, and we still talk to them regularly. So they're not all of one mind, but I think some have concluded that they have to get the hell out, and that's sad. And others have decided they are going to stay, gosh darn it. I'm trying not to curse. And they're holding on with their fingernails because they want to rebuild it. They know how important this institution is as a pillar. Providing fair and equal justice is like what the founders founded the country on. And so if we can't do that, then we don't have much of a country. I would say there are two things that are horrific that have happened. One is the centuries worth of expertise that protects us from terror attack, domestic terror, international terror. The expertise that's gone for protecting us from corporate fraud, from cyber hacking, from a foreign adversary engaged in some sort of spycraft that we didn't spot. The FBI is really quite good at that, but their leadership was taken out on January 30th. The entire leadership team was walked out the door. The second terrible thing, horrific thing that's happened is the credibility of the DOJ is in the balance. Are Americans going to believe when a Democrat gets into the White House that they're not prosecuting people because they don't like them? They politically are perceived as foes? Because that's the doubt people have now based on what's happening.
Just to add one point to that, in the book, there's another thing as part of that, which is that people are being moved up the chain now, not necessarily in the meritocracy that has always existed in the career ranks of the Department of Justice, but through loyalty tests. And we recount late in the book where the new acting FBI director and deputy director, the first thing they're asked is, did you vote for Donald Trump? Have you given money to Democrats? And they're like, we've never been asked such a question before with the FBI. And they refused to answer. They were temporarily in those positions, have been taken out, but our reporting is that that's continued. And so there's a question now of like the whole muscle memory of the way this place works and to evaluate things fairly and to look at the facts, or are you just there to please the leadership, the political leadership? And
you guys tell that story with a beautiful anecdote at the beginning of the book about a group. I mean, one of the things that I've thought for 9 years is that so much of this is on us for failing to really adequately communicate why the rule of law matters. The book seems to answer that. Will you talk about that?
Well, not to make you feel good, Nicolle, but you did literally talk about this nonstop for the last.
I know it didn't work. He won. I think people see it now because I think people. I think Tuesday night was such an amazing night to feel like the story can go in a different direction. I think someone asked me what covering Trump 2.0 is like, and I said it goes down, 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 and then when you think it can't get any worse, it plunges down further and grabs another once venerable institution and takes it with it. And that's what covering 2.0 has been like for 12 months. And I'd say the last 9 have been accelerated. But I think what the country showed on Tuesday night through all of its choices is that like a thing on the ballot in California that isn't even a person, that the people of California voted against a few years ago, they understand why they need it now. They understand that the House is on fire. And this book has all of the sort of receipts about why the rule of law matters and what happens when you lose it. Will you just answer that for us here as two people who are expert in that area?
Well, there's something that you've said a couple times on your show, sometimes when I'm there, sometimes when I'm not, where you're like, there's a cry from inside the House. And it's very evocative, and it stuck with me because that's how I feel about the people who eventually, against all of their internal wiring and DNA, eventually agreed to talk to Aaron and me and let us inside these rooms where these decisions were made. Some of them not so flattering, some of them a little bit bumbling. I think they eventually came to us 15 minutes, they said they'd talk to us, and then they ended up staying with us for a few hours. I think the reason was they want Americans to get it. They want Americans to understand this is not an esoteric, academic sounding phrase that we chat about in university halls. This is whether or not you fairly go to your work every day and are protected by our laws. That this is the difference between whether you or your neighbors are picked up and improperly charged with a crime without evidence because you got on the wrong side of Donald Trump or one of his friends. And they, as heartbroken as so many of them are about how this has played out for the Department of Justice, whether they're Republican or Democrat, by the way, they know, akin to what Nicolle is saying, that more Americans need to see the alarm fire. More Americans need to understand this is a big deal. And I will just, if you'll indulge me one more minute, I'll tell you something that really moved me, and Aaron and I have talked about it before, right before this book was published, and we had some last-minute ability to touch the pages. We decided to take a lot of names out of the book out of fear that those people would be harmed, that they would be fired, that they would be targeted the way we knew people had been targeted in the first Trump administration, and the way we now knew it had destabilized this institution. Almost all of the people whose names we took out have been fired or forced out. And the thing that also moved me was some of the people we went to and said, look, we're thinking about taking your name out. And not a small number of them said, leave it in. It's the way it was. Tell the truth. I'm okay with what happens.
What I remember from my time in government is that the FBI especially, but neither institution is sitting around watching MSNBC or Fox News. I mean, they're like most, and I worked in the Bush administration after 9/11. I mean, they were busy and they were not. I mean, the idea that Trump has succeeded in making anyone in this country think that there are political actors inside the FBI and DOJ is to me akin to the dehumanization that's gone on and the targeting of other vulnerable groups. And how did they let it happen? Did they just not believe in telling their own story until it was too late?
That's probably a good summation. There were times when we would be writing this book, and Carol and I would call somebody in the FBI or at DOJ and get livid that nobody had called us back for days. And this is the biggest story. We're writing about the president, investigations of the president. What could you be doing that's more important? And then a couple days later, we'd be like, do you have any idea how big the threat is that we've been dealing with? And
they're like, we were looking for terrorists.
Yeah.
And they are busy legitimately, but.
Right. And so there is, I think sometimes it helps to visualize the 7th floor of the Hoover Building. Inside, half of the whole floor is what they call a skiff. So, all the secrets can just move around inside that half of the building on that floor, because it's where the director works and deputy director. And there's a room where every morning they gather, and the FBI director sits around this huge horseshoe and big old wooden doors and the sealed FBI outside coming into there. And there's about 30 or 35 chairs inside that room. And all the folks who sit around there and brief every morning, at least for many years, had spent 15, 20 years working their way to those seats, had been through like the ringer in so many ways, and counterintelligence investigations and espionage cases. And the number of people that were in those positions on January 19th and all that experience, there's now single digits of all those folks remaining in that office, in that whole floor. They were all summarily kind of dismissed en masse in the first 15 days of the administration. So there is a real concern about where we go from here as far as experience. Back to you.
Well, and the persuasion piece, I guess what I'm getting at is that the country now knows the calls all came from inside the House. I remember putting up a graphic of everyone that had sounded the alarm about Trump, and they were all Republicans. And I said the conspiracy theories that Trump and Fox echo are so farcical, like a bunch of ex-Republicans gather in a treehouse and plot against a Republican president. It's like utter nonsense. But now we've moved so far down the path toward conspiracy and disinformation. How do we get it back?
Oh, wow. This is a big question for I don't know. I'll give you an example that is really disturbing to me. This book, we spend multiple chapters telling you about something called Arctic frost. Okay, nobody knows what the heck Arctic frost is, but we don't use those terms. It's the election interference case, the one that was finally opened April 14th, 2022, after the FBI spent 3 months looking at the law and trying to figure out, should they investigate Trump? Should they investigate Trump's campaign? Eventually, they were so freaked out and fearful, they decide, we're just going to name the Trump campaign as a subject. We're not going to name Trump because it's too nerve-wracking. So Arctic frost now is being described in social media by Republicans as this horrendous effort, politicization by the FBI and the horrific left-wing cabal of the Department of Justice to target and wiretap and spy on hundreds of Republicans. And Aaron and I are watching this on social media. It's just been going on for the last couple of weeks. Egged on by Josh Hawley, Lindsey Graham, Ron Johnson. It's complete BS. And I mean, I think I could say that on your show. It's complete BS. They had a series of subpoenas of Republicans that they issued, and we've looked at some of those subpoenas based on our book reporting. They were targeting Republicans for questions and records because 84 Republicans signed certificates that were fraudulent. And duh. And this idea that they wiretapped them.
Back to the bank robbers, like if they were robbing a bank and these were the people that had taken out the...
Yeah. Right. And I like that little light because I saw some of my friends right there. Claudia, I see you. Also, this idea of wiretapping, also total BS. We know because we've looked at the documents, and we had to for the book, and we were delighted to get them, but there was no wiretapping. There's something called process. You get the metadata of someone's phone records because you want to know, why was Donald Trump calling all these Republicans on the morning of January 6th? And why was he calling them at 2 o'clock when the building had been breached and Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund is nearly crying on a police radio, Capitol breach, send emergency reinforcements. Why is it that Trump is talking to these Republicans? That's why they were looking for the call data. That is not wiretapping. Do I sound a little bit annoyed?
No, but what I was going to ask you is, when you relive January 6th, and I have the officers on my show all the time, and you cannot forget that Harry Dunn and Michael Fanone are just as apolitical as anyone we talk about. And I mean, not now because they were victims of horrific violence on January 6th at the hands of Trump supporters, but a lot of those officers have come out and said, I voted for Trump once or twice. They're not political. The only variable seems to be the people that will tell the truth about what he's doing and the people that continue to tell the lies. So this is where we are right now. This takes us up to the moment. Where are we heading?
Again, that is way too hard.
But I mean, do you see anything other than the public who went out Tuesday night and said, I don't think so. But I mean, they're in charge of the executive branch, and the executive branch has only become more powerful. What is their end game?
They meaning?
Trump, Bondi, Patel.
So they're rewriting history. I mean, they're rewriting history in front of our face. They're saying that department that our book shows was the antithesis of politicized was politicized. It's like, it's Orwellian. War is love. Peace, peace is hate. The Ministry of War, the Ministry of Love. It is a rewrite of every bit of history that we've experienced. They're now saying that Donald Trump is effectively paying people back for being weaponized and being politicized, when actually they very, very reluctantly looked into what is a federal crime, interfering in an election. And it almost became, it killed several people And it is not a small thing that happened. And there's a reason why Colorado began looking at whether or not Donald Trump would legally be allowed to be on the ballot in Colorado, because you cannot support an insurrection and be on their ballot. The Supreme Court felt differently, and we know how that turned out. But Nicolle, you ask, like, where are we headed? I think that all I can do in answering that question without completely whiffing it is saying that I'm really amazed by the sources that were brave enough to talk to us, and I think that they are going to be critical to restoring this institution and waking Americans up. I don't think every American is going to buy this book. I'm really glad all of you did, and I'm really glad that it looks like a lot of people are buying it. I'm not just selfishly. I'm really glad they want to know this history. But I think it's the cries from inside the house, but also the damage that's being done that people start to feel. I saw, as we drove to the train station to come to New York today, a sign that was put up, and I noticed that it is the 5th sign now put up on that same street, and it says, "ICE kidnapped a member of this community." And sort of they're on telephone poles, and I think as more people recognize what's really happening, they'll start to demand a response.
I'll pile on couple of thoughts. Just that someone wrote a review in Politico of our book and said it should be required reading for Democrats to think about what happens in the future. I don't know if that's the case, but I can say that Democrats do face a couple really interesting challenges if they win the next election. Because what do you do if you're the next Democratic incoming president? Do you keep Kash Patel as your FBI director? But it's a really important question with not a simple answer, because if the next Democratic president immediately fires him, then both parties have then essentially made that a political position. And so thereafter, every president... Is
Kash's crime against the institution his party ID or his incompetence?
Well... It's not
in your reporting. I mean, as someone who covers the FBI, is he damaging it because he's a registered Republican, or is he damaging it because he has no idea what the Bureau does?
Well, there are a whole level of folks now being promoted on that merit, on that loyalty test, right? And so, if you're the Democrats, do you come in and try to figure out which ones had have the pedigree and have the experience to go on up, or do you try to what will be perceived by the other side as a witch hunt of its own to clean house inside the Department of Justice? And if this goes back and forth, then it's a real weakening of the civil service, and the way that in the bowels of the Department of Justice, career civil servants have just looked at the facts of the case and tried to apply them to a given situation. I'm not going to answer your question about Kash Patel.
Well, I mean, I think it's an important hinge point, though, because I think there are some people for whom that'll be really tricky, right? People that stayed after Merrick Garland urged them to protect the rule of law. There won't necessarily be an accounting of all the micro protections they applied on the rule of law, maybe making sure that some facts made it into some documents so that it wasn't a complete betrayal of the grand jury process. But I mean, there have to be some people whose, so far what we've seen with our own eyes, I mean, Kash Patel has fired people to their face based on your reporting, telling them, I wish I didn't have to do this, but the White House is making me. Hasn't Kash Patel dimed out Kash Patel?
There's one thing I can say about Kash Patel that's in the book, which is this. The day that he's up there on Capitol Hill giving the testimony about what he knows about firings that are going on inside the Department of Justice already, he says, I know nothing about this. Inside the Department of Justice, there are people who, by that point in time, have identified themselves as members of the Director's Advisory Team, and they've left little doubt that they're there working on the behest of the incoming FBI director. And so, they believe at that point in time that the folks that are being let out the door believe he's lying to Congress in that moment. So the very kind of things that the past FBI director is now facing indictment for, you wonder where things go for Kash Patel.
That I'm so glad you said that. That is a really gripping moment when all 5 executive assistant directors of the FBI are watching the TV screen while Kash Patel is testifying, I don't know anything about any firings, and they are getting basically their pink slip that day. You know, like they're being summoned to this little office and told, I'm sorry, you're going to have to leave. And it's because of the director's advisory team.
And just, that's what Comey was indicted for, was this sort of obscure, long ago appearance before Congress, where that's what he's been charged with, as far as we know, lying to Congress. And that's the irony. We only have 6 minutes, and I haven't said the word Jackson before you take over and ask questions. But I want to, I mean, you have the freshest and the brightest and the most comprehensive story about Jack Smith, and it starts with him not taking pain medicine for a horrible. Just tell us your portrait of Jack Smith. You want to go first?
I'll go first, and he'll clean up. So we're journalists, we're competitive. We were super psyched that we got inside the Jack Smith operation, because the guy didn't talk the entire time. And his first meeting with his prosecutors was, none of you talk to the media or you're out. So we felt really good that we were able to, finally get people to tell us part of this cool history. And it starts with Merrick Garland on November 14th, recognizing that reporters are flying to Mar-a-Lago, November 14th, 2022. Reporters are flying to Mar-a-Lago because Trump keeps making noise. I'm going to make a big announcement. I'm going to make a big announcement. Merrick Garland calls Jack Smith in the Netherlands, where he's working as a Hague prosecutor, the lead Hague prosecutor, and says, if I give you the special counsel's job, will you take it if I offer it to you? And Jack Smith says, yes, sir. What Merrick Garland doesn't know is that Jack Smith is in horrible shape physically, a complete mess. He knows he's had a bicycle accident. The guy's an Ironman and a triathlete, and he bikes and runs and swims ridiculous numbers of miles all the time. So he bikes to work. Well, he's in this horrible bike accident, breaks his leg in multiple places. Nurses describe, clinicians describe his leg as being like a noodle when he came in. He's taking so many pain meds on November 14th that at night, when he has a gap, he's screaming his head off, and they eventually have to move him to another ward so he doesn't wake people up. So when Garland then on the next day, days later, is going to appoint Smith because Trump has announced he's running for the office, Merrick Garland is like, I need a special counsel. I can't be investigating this guy. Jack Smith takes himself, against medical advice, out of the hospital, stops taking the painkillers, and takes the oath of office because he doesn't want anybody to question his mental ability to take the oath. Crazy.
We question his mental capacity for other reasons, but not because he's on drugs.
But no, amazing that, that kind of, we have joked that he's kind of this bionic man, and the other element besides his painkiller hiatus is that he's briefed in the Netherlands by these prosecutors who fly over and explain to him the classified documents case. Another team explains to him the election interference case. He's living in his kitchen where there's a metal bed where he's sleeping because he can't get up to the first floor. And he says to the classified documents team, okay, let's make a decision on whether we're going to indict in 3 months. And they're like, wait a minute, we need more time, maybe 6 months, we could make a decision. There's a lot of classified records, there's a lot of sensitivities, but that is the tone that he sets. This kind of like, we got a clock, we got to answer the question for the American people. Did this guy engage in crimes? And we've got to figure this out, not just for the American people, but also for Donald Trump. He's running for office, these allegations are hanging out there. If we're going to decline to indict, let's do that too.
Jack Smith comes back to D.C. the day on Christmas Day, and the next day, half the office comes in, and he just starts laying down these deadlines. You need to look at every interview that was done over 2 years by the House Select Committee, and you have 1 week to do it and to write up all your analysis of what it means. And they start meeting in this room that they call Dog Park because it looks over a dog park in Northeast D.C. And they keep the blinds all drawn because they don't want anybody to see Jack Smith and his prosecutors, and they're drawing on whiteboards and putting the case together. He just moves relentlessly fast all the way through, driving decisions, drafts. These guys are writing 300, 400-page summaries of all the evidence they're gathering, and they're getting a lot. I mean, they're getting people who are in the room with Trump talking about classified documents that he waving around a document that he is claiming is classified. To that bionic man part, later over the next few months, his leg is healing, and he starts going for 15 and then 25-mile bike rides in the morning before going into the office, and his security detail can't keep up, and so they start placing out the officers to pick up and then go with him because they can't keep up for 15 miles. Eventually, they get e-bikes to keep up with Jack Smith over these months.
If he'd started earlier, do you think he would have brought a successful case against Donald Trump?
This is the big, obviously, million-dollar question. If they'd had those 15 months, and I see it in two ways. If they had the 15 months, how much further would they have gotten? How many more people would have talked in those first months to prosecutors when Donald Trump's reascendancy wasn't so clear? And how much of Donald Trump's reascendancy is because there was no investigation? He never felt footsteps. He never had any of his friends or aides getting interviewed by the FBI or by DOJ. We don't know. I think, sadly, that's the answer. We just don't know.
Do you think that gap will ever... Do you think we'll ever have clues as to what would have happened if an investigation into crimes that happened on live television that we all saw had started after we'd seen that with our own eyes?
I want to make sure I understand your question. Do you think we'll ever know?
Do you think there's any way to sort of re-engineer the timeline? Do you think anyone will ever investigate why an investigation into crimes that happened on live TV didn't happen the day after they took place?
Well, I don't know that people will want to invest in this 3-act tragedy with another set of
You guys just did in a best-selling book. It is literally a 3-act story. It goes Barr, Garland, Bondi. I mean, we are here because you just did.
I'm not sure anybody's going to want to redo what Aaron and I did. but I think that in answer to your earlier question, it's hard to imagine. Merrick Garland also did something kind of unusual that prosecutors bristled at, which is that in the Labor Day of 2022, he froze both of these investigations. One of them was a slam dunk. Classified documents, people have been court-martialed, people are in prison today for doing what Donald Trump did. And honestly, the volume of records and the sensitivity of records at Donald Trump were much worse than any other case ever that anyone knows about. When Merrick Garland froze those cases for those 2 months, it was based on something called the 60-day rule. I'm nerding out here for a second, but bear with me. It's the Department of Justice deciding we can't do anything 2 months before a candidate runs for office that could impact or hurt their investigation. We can't take any overt steps that could influence an investigation. Merrick Garland went super conservative and decided that even though Donald Trump wasn't on the ballot, he was essentially the Republican Party's de facto leader, and he froze those cases. The classified documents case was on the, I'm sorry, I always mess up my sports analogies. Nicolle and Aaron know how to do this. It was, as described to us, on the 5-yard line. And so could that have made a difference? It seems like it might have.
So more questions from the new information than we could ever answer. But I want to let you guys do the asking. So who wants to go first? Go ahead.
You keep talking about Garland making all these decisions. You haven't mentioned Biden at all. To what extent was Biden behind any of these? Because he worked for Biden. I mean, ultimately, they were Biden's decisions.
Okay, I'll try to repeat the questions, and then I'll pass my microphone down there. The question actually assumes that Biden was involved in some of the decisions that Garland made. Is that fair? And why? Yeah. Let me pass the microphone to the next person asking a question while you answer that.
I'm going to let you answer it because I just went.
So when Merrick Garland comes in, he's being named as Biden's introducing him as his nominee for Attorney General. He turns to Garland and says, "You don't answer to me. you answer to the American people and the rule of law. And Merrick Garland took that very seriously. He really did not. I mean, this guy had as an earlier, much younger DOJ employee, had been charged with writing some of the very rules and statutes and this thing called the principles of federal prosecution that dealt with separation between the White House and DOJ. And he really felt it was important that we don't take our orders from the White House. There's one time where that kind of bubbles up when the House Select Committee is subpoenaing Steve Bannon for his testimony, and Bannon refuses to go in and do so and provide his account. And Biden is asked about this kind of just off the cuff when he gets off of coming back from a funeral, actually, and says, yeah, I think, DOJ should indict them and should, prosecute them for doing that. And to show how different a place we are in right now compared to how the current Attorney General says I work at the directive of the President, within a few minutes, the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, the Deputy Attorney General, Lisa Monaco, his press staff, and their senior staffs are all on a conference call debating what to do. And 52 minutes after Biden says that, the Department of Justice releases a statement saying, we will make our decisions based on the law, period, full stop. And Biden stuck his foot over the line, and Garland was going to be like, we're not going to do that. And so he really did not, and they really didn't talk a lot about this.
I asked him that question when he was on my show, and he said that he had never interfered and pointed to the cases against his son as another data point in that. You guys have a microphone out there? Okay.
Thanks so much. This has been fascinating. How would you recommend, given what you know, the Democrats make use of this? And I know we're kind of talking around it, but I really feel like, I don't know the strategy, and being a strong Democrat, I really wish I knew better.
Well, I'm not a politician. I'm not even a lawyer, though I play one on TV. And so I want to stay away from giving that kind of advice, but I'll tell you what some of our...
I don't even mean advice. I'm just like...
It's good.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what our sources have said. They've said, look, you've got to choose a model for how to run the Department of Justice the next time around. And they say very, very robustly that they don't think the Merrick Garland model is going to work. It doesn't mean that Merrick Garland is like the end-all worst choice in the world for HE. Very intelligent man, very ethical man, but they're very concerned that that's not the way you're going to rebuild this department. But you can't also, according to them, have the Pam Bondi method, which is, I'll do whatever my president tells me. It's going to be really challenging to find what the new model for the DOJ should be. But one thing that some really much brighter people than me and Aaron have said, legal minds have said to us, is there needs to be another kind of bubble wrap insulation. Just like after Watergate, there has to be another kind of huge, independent, impermeable wall between the White House and the Justice Department so that it's really viewed as credible, independent, and you don't have a freaking bloodshed purge of the people that the president doesn't like, who are protecting us. As not to scare you guys, but one of our sources said there is no imaginary safety net around the United States. It's these people that we're firing.
Just one other thing I'd add to that, which is that, so for so long, for decades and decades, the Department of Justice only spoke when it would, appeared in court. Finally, here's the end of result of our investigation. Here's the charges, and now we'll talk about it. Obviously, now it's a very different situation where the minute they think about investigating someone, they're out there talking about it. We're going to investigate this person. And, to go back, basically Garland went back to that. We're not going to talk about it until we talk about it in court. But the world, the internet doesn't wait for the Department of Justice to make a decision. In the meantime, there's so much chatter and so much discussion about it. There must be some new place to find the middle ground there where we talk about investigation as it's going on so that, it's being framed by the Department of Justice. It's not being framed by other people out there imposing their views of what it is and what it isn't.
A judge today who was appointed by Ronald Reagan resigned and wrote about it in The Atlantic for the first time. I would say that I'm not sure the Democrats are the ones that are going to have to talk about it. I think it depends how bad it gets, and it may be the Supreme Court or the next person who wants to represent the Republican Party. I mean, we are in a whole nother level of failure of imagination. If we don't take all of the things that Carol is saying pretty subtly and elegantly about national security, we have no net. The people that protect us from terrorist attacks after 9/11 are among the people that are gone. The people that protect us from cyber attacks after 2016, they're gone. Not because anyone has any idea who they voted for, but because they protected the country from things that somehow tangentially touched the person who attacked the country in the elections on January 6th, and a person who was cozy enough with Vladimir Putin in 2016 that his campaign got swept up in those probes. That's all they did. So I think it's not clear that the Democrats will be the ones that have to answer that question. It might be the whole country.
I would highly recommend you read that judge's piece, even though it's in a competitive organization, the Atlantic. Sorry, I would recommend you read the piece by Judge Wolf. It's really, it's exactly why we wrote the book.
Do you have a microphone? For your questions? Wait for the microphone so everyone can hear you. Here it is.
Oh. I have a question. When Andrew McCabe wrote his book, I guess it was over 5 years ago, I went to that book signing. Very nice man, very intelligent looking. And I asked him, I said, everyone in this room is from New York. We all know that Trump was always a crook. Why didn't the Bureau investigate him? And he looked at me with that intelligent face, and he wanted to give me a good answer. He did. But all he said was, "You're right, madam." Can you answer that a little better?
Well,
based on what you know?
Well, Andy McCabe, plays a starring role in our book. So if you definitely check out the pages involving him. He was on Donald Trump's hit list because he is the person, after James Comey, the FBI director, was fired summarily by Trump, unprecedented event to fire an FBI director in the middle of their 10-year tenure. It was Andy McCabe that opened a secret investigation into whether or not the President of the United States was obstructing the Russian criminal investigation. That probe into why in the world multiple Russian operatives were spending so much quality time with Trump campaign figures. So maybe Andy was being shy at that moment, but he opened that investigation, and it is the reason Donald Trump targeted him for firing. And you'll see a lot more about it in the book that I won't bore you with our last minute.
I guess I meant, why didn't they investigate him before and save the country all this grief?
Oh.
I don't know.
That's really funny. Where did these FBI guys that are fired go? And will they come back?
Well, there are good jobs for former FBI agents out there. One interesting thing that I've noticed is that they are already asking some of them to come back. There was a bulletin put out through law enforcement channels recently that anybody who was left the department in the last couple of years, you're welcome to come back and get your pension, and we'll give you a salary just to come back, because they think, by one estimate that Carol said in a gathering we had a little while ago, that by the best estimates now are that about 4,000 FBI agents and prosecutors have left since the Trump administration began.
Do you want to add?
No. Anybody? I think I have one more.
Okay, you had your hand up, and I was going to pass the mic down to you. There you go.
I recognize that this audience is before two very seasoned and print journalists with true bona fides as journalists, and in front of somebody who has really been able on TV to keep people balanced when they're on the show and to make sure that the show is fact-based. But Carol, you had an opinion piece in the New York Times last week, and I noticed, because you are a mom, you responded to some of the comments. And there was a comment where somebody said, well, why didn't you do this or why didn't you do that? And you very plainly said, we're journalists. Aaron and I are journalists, and it's not our job to do this. We're here to present the facts. How much has that, how has it changed? Perception of journalism really changed since the advent of One America News or Newsmax, or the way that sometimes Fox News is, and how has your job changed in the sense of having to say, we're journalists, we aren't here to do anything other than report what the facts are?
Well, thanks for the question. The vitriol, the level of vitriol is a lot higher against reporters now. I thought it was pretty bad in Trump 1, when Jim Acosta and Caitlin Collins and others, and my great colleague David Farenhold, were having their news parent organizations pay for their security on the road. They were in danger when they were reporting because they were identifiable, and Trump supporters had been encouraged. You may remember the famous campaign rally in Louisville, Kentucky, where a black woman was being pushed out by various people that were rally supporters, and he said, "Go ahead, get him out of here, I'll pay your legal bills." I'm paraphrasing a little bit there. I don't remember it exactly. So the violence again and the potential for violence against reporters is pretty serious. But you're asking, how do we respond to people questioning our facts? It's really hard. I think we're going to have to do more of what I call show your work. The Post has really done a wonderful job of this, but we're going to have to do more of it. And it's like, we talked to 26 people, and they work in this place, and we can't identify them or they'll get fired, but they knew this happened, and this is how we know they knew. And these are some of the records that we obtained that confirm this information. You have to fight for people to believe you. There's no more Cronkite benefit of the doubt. And it's very challenging, but I think one of the problems is that there are a lot of media deserts. This is beyond our book topic, but people don't meet reporters anymore because there are fewer of us and fewer outlets. And then you are combating people who are getting filled with a Fox News loudspeaker in their ear all day long, and that is not, I've seen many, many times where I know what's being reported is poppycock.
Can I say something optimistic about this? I actually think that I've been the least optimistic person, like on my block, in my building, in my elevator, on my floor for about 10 months. But I think what happened Tuesday night suggests that everyone with a phone that is providing content on what's happening in their neighborhood is a credible journalist. And I think I've never had to cross this hurdle because I came to television as George W. Bush's spokesperson, and then Sarah Palin Shepard, and then someone who became horrified by Donald Trump's rise. And I lived my whole career out loud. No one ever, and I said who I voted for in 2016. I mean, the votes for Hillary Clinton, and I would have voted for Joe Biden's corpse. I was one of those people. I mean, I have never felt like people know what they're getting when I'm on television, and it's totally different for a journalist. They're pursuing sources, and it doesn't aid the investigative process if they know their politics. But from wherever you come from as someone sharing information, I think the more transparency you can provide and the more lifting up of the actual reporting that you can do, I think people are voracious for information. And every American out in their community taking videos of ICE activity is risking their jobs. They're risking, in some cases, their safety. And they are credible journalists. We see those videos and we run them up a food chain to verify them. And if they're true, we put them on TV. So I actually think there's this unbelievable renaissance of information gatherers, which at its basic level, that's what reporters are, that people don't just trust, they're starved for. And I think Tuesday's results show that people in California on this ballot measure, and I'm from California. California never really matters that much politically. I was sort of a chip on our shoulder when we lived and voted there. But yeah, well, but look at how that's not true anymore, right? The two of the biggest stories internationally Tuesday night were in New York City and the state of California. So I have thought for the last 12 months that journalism is coming back, and it might not look like what it always looked like. It might be more small d democratized, and that is a very good thing. Viewers and readers may demand to know our personal bias. I've always revealed mine, and I think that might be a good thing. It might make some people uncomfortable, but that might also be very healthy. And the competition is fantastic. What they're doing on the right with podcasts isn't something to rage against, it's something to emulate. And what they're doing on Fox News is, in some instances, dangerous, because a lot of people have family members that get all their information, all their context from that, and it's wrong. But it needs to be studied. Like when I was working on campaigns, you'd study the competition and then you'd take what works and you'd use it for good. At least that was what we told ourselves. And so I think a lot of what's happening, and you look at the response to this book, this is a bestseller competing with, not just other investigative journalism books, but everything out there. So I think it says a lot of good things about the public's hunger for facts in journalism. One more.
You mentioned that you thought, the documents case was like a slam dunk or as close to one. How do you get the Elaine Cannon, the judge? I mean, I saw her, as soon as I heard her name, I knew that was going nowhere, Like, literally, she did everything she could, at least in my view, to basically shut it down, or if not shut it down, just slow it enough that he could be, the election would become more of the issue than the case. And how did they even let her?
Okay, wait. Aaron's got a great story to tell you.
Yeah.
This is in the book.
Yeah, there is a few pages on this because it's such a huge pivotal decision, right? And it's shocking to people even inside Jack Smith's office, because they had a grand jury in D.C. They've been investigating in D.C. People had been hired to work on this case, assuming it was going to be prosecuted in D.C. if it reached an indictment. And there's a scene where one of those prosecutors is told in the hallway about Jack Smith's decision, and his immediate response is, "Are you effing serious?
Are you effing insane?"
Insane, yes. That's the actual verbatim quote. Insane. And, he's not the only one, because the National Security Division is also briefed on this. And one of the higher, senior advisors to Matthew Olson, then the Assistant Attorney General for National Security, says, you realize if Eileen Cannon gets the case, it's dead. And, part of what's going on in that whole time period is something else we discovered, which is that people on Jack Smith's team weren't so worried about it, in part because they had calculated there was about a 1 in 6 chance that they would get Eileen Cannon. They later realized it's actually about 1 in 3. And so this is kind of some of the background where you just don't know if all of the facts were known, how clearly it could have ended up in front of Cannon, if that would have been any different in thinking there. But Jack Smith goes forward. He feels like, I've got the case, the facts are what they are. Any judge has to look at this and take them at face value and let this case proceed. And he was wrong.
Yeah, certainly was.
There's one more with the hand up. You want to do one more?
Where are you pointing? Oh, okay.
Just real quickly, this is, did you mean this for me?
Oh, you already asked a question?
Well, I was going to follow up on
Yes.
Do you think that these institutions will ever come back to what they were? And how long will it take?
So I don't want to mess up the huge optimism and note that Nicolle brought us on, but we've had sources tell us they think it's going to take a generation, but we don't know, right? We don't know. I will tell you I'm heartened by something I heard at while we were at a book party. I got a signal message from someone who said there's a team forming now to rebuild this institution, and I was pretty heartened by who was in charge of it. These are career prosecutors who want to restore this place as soon and as quickly as they can. So I can't give you a prediction, but I think that there's a reason why people work for the Department of Justice when they could make $1 to $10 million a year in a law firm. And it's a calling. It's a view that they are so proud. It's the honor of their life to walk into the court well and say, I'm Carol Leonnig, here for the United States. So that kind of passion gives me a lot of hope. I have to stop that answer and just say, I'm really delighted. It gives me a lot of hope to see you guys all here. And I know Nicolle probably is going to say something really nice, but I want to say it's an honor to have somebody like Nicolle really dig into the book, focus on it. Aaron and I could not be happier that she agreed to come out and use her time to talk.
Thank you.
Stop that.
Well, I wanted to let everyone that had a question for Carol ask it. So if you wanted to ask your question, you had the microphone for a second and we took it from you. It's your time.
Just a quick follow-up to my last question. Everything I hear from the Democratic Party is, and the leaders in the Democratic Party is, the midterms will make all the difference. Do you believe that?
Who? Me?
Any of you? Based on what you've read and written.
I think that what I've learned how to do is to not look to any politicians to answer any questions. So whatever I wonder, and I wonder that too. I don't think that the answer lies in what the politicians say about it. I think it lies in what the voters say about it. And it's like a real pivot for me. But I have been not just disappointed, but heartbroken by politicians. First, my own party that just crushed me. I used to get signal messages too from all the Republicans I work with in Republican politics. Keep doing what you're doing. We think he's disgusting. And then I'd see them on CNN talking about how smart and brave and revolutionary Trump was as president. And so, the Republicans have shown themselves as too cowardly to say in public what they say in private. And journalists like Carol and Aaron have found them all out. Mitch McConnell told journalists covering him that Trump was the, quote, worst human being. The quote from John Kelly is the, quote, most damaged human being. And whenever I think I might want to insult Donald Trump, I never do it. I quote Mitch McConnell and John Kelly. And then if I'm really upset, I quote J.D. Vance, who called him, quote, America's Hitler, quote, cultural heroin. And if that doesn't get me there, I just go for another Republican like Lindsey Graham, who stood on the floor of the Senate after January 6th and said, quote, Donald, it was fun, but we're done. And then if that isn't enough, if I hunger for more, I go to Kevin McCarthy, who on taped phone calls said to House leadership, impeachment, quote, impeachment isn't fast enough. Are they looking at the 25th Amendment, end quote. So the Republicans hate him in a way that speaks to how he's humiliated them. I just don't want him running any of these institutions because I worked in the White House after 9/11 and I saw them protect us from the next 9/11. And I know a lot of these people and they are the least, to my chagrin, the least political and the least press-interested, press-curious people you'll ever meet. All they want to do is protect the country. And we even talked about the military. They're even less interested than anyone in the Department of Justice in any of this. So I don't know what elected Democrats will do in the midterms, but I'm pretty sure the public has the greater chance of saving us than anyone in office.
Can we take just one more, because this gentleman apparently is.
Of course.
Thank you so much for this important work. My question is the following, which is that if the Constitution's adhered to, Trump will be gone in 2028, but there may be another Republican in his position who loses the Electoral College but tries to pull another fake elector scheme. What can we as Americans do to ensure that that's as unlikely as possible?
I'm so sorry to say that that question is so uncomfortable for me because I really don't feel like I can give advice about what Americans can do. I apologize. I will just say that I think Nicole's on the right track. Americans need to demand what they want from their government. I haven't seen Americans stand up in huge droves to demand that we not disappear people who are showing up in court for asylum appropriately following the rules. I haven't seen Americans stand up and say, my God, how can you be charging somebody when prosecutors have concluded that there is not evidence to probable cause to go to a grand jury? So that's what I notice.
I mean, and I think that if the department is rebuilt, those were the first crimes investigated around January 6th. Those were investigated while Trump was still there. They were noticed. Investigative, you have to read the book to understand. But right, weren't the fake electors the first crimes that were noticed by the National Archives?
They were, and we have some new stuff in the book that's about December 2020, when a low-level investigator in the National Archives brings these documents and says, wow, it looks like it's coordinated. It looks like maybe something's going on here with Republicans, maybe the Trump campaign, maybe we should look at the fact that these are frauds, and they look like they were done together, and it takes, as Aaron and I found, 15 months.
I'm going to thank everybody one more time for coming out in the rain, but mostly thank you guys for writing the book. Aaron?